Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Hi, I'm Alicia Dixon-Garrard, and welcome to Encounter, a show of the Broome County Council of Churches, where we talk about faith and community and current events and other interesting topics. And I'm so glad today to have Reverend Doug Taylor and Carla Michalak with us. We today are going to talk about Women's History Month. So thank you for joining us. And I'll start with just having you two tell us a little bit about yourselves. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. Well, I am a professor at SUNY Broome, and I teach political science, and I'm very passionate about civic engagement, civic education. I'm a member of the local League of Women Voters, and I also am a poll worker, and most recently got very, very involved in celebrating women's right to vote. I was on the Broome Tioga Suffrage Anniversary Committee with Assemblywoman Lepardo. So I really enjoy all of those things.
Ah, you're active.
Try to be.
And I am Reverend Douglas Taylor. I serve the congregation in Binghamton that is Unitarian Universalist. I've been there, we're in our 20th year together as a minister and congregation. And one of the things that I think is remarkable about that congregation is that we're always on, we try to be at the front of a lot of social issues, of progressive leaning topics such as women's rights and all over the board, and trying to make the world a better place and to have compassion and love be at the front.
Yes, that is true. I'm often, if I'm driving down Riverside Drive, we'll see a sign for something or another. And I'm like making a mental note in my head, oh yeah, you got to get to that. I don't always remember, but yes, you guys are very active in those sort of things, and it's appreciated. So, as mentioned, we're talking about Women's History Month because that is March, one of the observances in March. There's several, but that's one of the big ones. So I thought it'd be interesting to learn a little bit about the history of Women's History Month. How did we kind of get here? I'll let you take that, Carla.
Okay. So it started with a celebration in Santa Rosa, California in 1978, right on March 8th, which is International Women's Day, which we just celebrated.
Yes.
And the women in Santa Rosa decided that it was time to recognize women and their contributions, and that up till that point, the contributions and the history of women were not included in the K-12 curriculum. So they developed a whole week of celebratory activities and educational activities surrounding March 8th. And other communities caught wind of that, and from there that built and caught fire across the country. So that's how it started. And then in 1980, a group of women and historians, they're known as at the time, National Women's History Project. Now they're known as the National Women's History Alliance, for the historians in the audience. They lobbied for national recognition. So it started at a grassroots level,
Yes.
as most things do. And as it took on some popularity, they wanted the national government to adopt it for the whole country. And so in February of 1980, President Jimmy Carter issued the first presidential proclamation that week of March 8th be National Women's History Week. So we have evolved because now we are celebrating a whole month.
A whole month, yes.
So that takes time. Everything takes time, right? So there was more advocacy, and by 1987, the Congress, with the advocacy of Senator, at the time she was Representative Barbara Mikulski, and Senator Orrin Hatch, created a public law saying that every March, would be dedicated to Women's History Month, and that the president at the time, whoever the president was, would declare that month as Women's History Month. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, yeah. And it's very interesting because I remember growing up and, vaguely in the textbooks, women were present, not overwhelmingly so, but to imagine a time in which they weren't because of the fact that the contributions were overlooked is kind of hard to imagine. So, wow, yeah, I'm grateful for that advocacy of the women and the generations before me, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly one of the points that gets me thinking sometimes. We note particular women in history who have done remarkable things, names that come to mind of folks who stand out, who have made progress for the nation, for the world, for women in so many different ways, in science and but part of the point, I think, is to recognize that all of that was done without women having a capacity in society to take on roles like CEO or president, or to, for the longest time, even get out a bank account without a man co-signing. And so to think of like all of the accomplishments that they were able to bring as second-class folks, and it wasn't all that long ago, thinking back in terms of history.
Yes.
And so the way that things have opened up, and yet our minds still stop us from recognizing that capacity and honoring and giving leadership and authority.
Yes, 1976 is not that long ago, which, I guess I'll be transparent and say it's the year I was born. So I think, okay, I'm not young anymore, but I'm not old, at least. Youngish, oldish is kind of where I'm at. So I'm like, 46 years was not that long ago that someone said, hey, we should start recognizing the contributions of women in this country. And when we were preparing, you said something interesting, that it actually, every president, every year, whoever's in office has to say, we're going to celebrate this. It isn't automatic.
Right. As part of the public law, the president must proclaim the month as Women's History Month. So, and there is a theme, and this year's theme I thought was really interesting. I came across it when I was doing some research. So the theme this year is dedicated to celebrating women who tell our stories. So that's women in media, whether it be print media, radio, news, blogs, social media, all the women who tell our stories.
Right.
And it made me think of the movie that's recently out, She Said, which is a movie dedicated to two journalists, New York Times journalists, who told the story of the, really launched the Me Too movement. And the story of Harvey Weinstein and his sexual harassment of the women in Hollywood.
Right.
So, so the theme is really dedicated to all those women who speak up on our behalf.
I love that, speak up on our behalf, and we need that, the brave ones who are good with words, that's their gift and kind of their contribution to history.
And dedication.
And their dedication to making sure those voices are heard, so to speak. So we've done all this stuff with women. Do we still need to keep doing it? Do we think this month is still significant? It's kind of a leading question, of course, but what is the significance of continuing to recognize Women's History Month? Do you want it?
Well, I think in part what I'd said a little earlier about that there's some legislation that's changed, allowing women to have some power and some authority and some capacity, but the mindset is still in the way. I think a lot of folks have a particular view and will like they don't want a woman as a pastor, they don't want a woman as a president, they don't like they think women CEOs are like they have a stereotype or an opinion about what it would be like if we let that happen.
Right.
So I think the story, this idea that the theme this year is about those who tell the story is powerful, because I think that's a piece that legislation can't change that.
Yes.
You know, it's a mindset. And so having a month that focuses on awareness is very important. I mean, it's not like for the month of March, women get pay equity all of a sudden, but it raises awareness, which it keeps it in our attention so that the story that we tell about it can begin to change.
Yeah.
And I do want to add that despite the fact that it's 2023 and we think that women have made so many advances, when you take a look at our elected officials, women have made advances in that area, but we're still down. So there's only 28% of women in the House, and we're 51% of the population.
Wow.
So we can do so much better. And in the Senate, we have 25% of women in the Senate. So we don't have adequate representation at the national level. And even locally in Broome County, only 3 women are serving on the Broome County Legislature.
Wow.
And so that's 20%. So again, we need more women who are willing to run for office and represent us and speak up on our behalf. So those numbers need to come up. They're better, they're coming up, but we need to do much, much better. So that's another thing to think about. And pay equity, if I could pick up on that. Tomorrow, March 14th, is Pay Equity Day for women. That's how long they have to work. So basically 15 months they have to work in order to catch up to make what a man made in 2022.
Wow.
And that's on average. Women of color will have to work even longer before they achieve pay equity.
Yes, which of course touches home for me, being an African American woman and also being a pastor. Several things you guys have said in terms of in spite of all the advances we have made in the country, there's still a long way to go. So that's part of the significance of Women's Awareness Month and Women's History Month, is to educate, to remember and celebrate what we have done, but also to educate and recognize the strides we still do have to make in terms of there's still a lot of gender inequity when it comes to income and being allowed access and opportunity to leadership of our country, of our cities, government at multiple levels, our churches, basically all the social and civic organizations that form us as citizens, that then shape our mindset too as citizens, as you were saying, Reverend Doug, shapes our mindset that then leads to people wanting to say, hey, maybe we should do some things a little bit differently, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about what do we mean by equity? What do we mean when we say that? Some people might actually cringe when they hear that word. I think some people are okay celebrating history and kind of maybe praising women's accomplishments from a distance. But when it comes to what you were saying, Reverend Doug, about having a female boss, having a female president, a female pastor, or this idea of gender equity, they might chafe a little bit. It may seem like, oh, we're just being politically correct, we're just, playing politics, we're just making a mountain out of a molehill. What would you guys say to that kind of aversion, so to say, to talking about these things?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is a quote that I'm unfortunately going to paraphrase. I'm not sure that I have it quite spot on, but it's something like, those who have been in positions of power, when equality is brought, it feels to them like oppression. It's not oppression, but it's a relinquishing of being at the center. And I think that is an aspect of what's at play. Folks don't realize how centered. Here I sit. It's like one of the odd experiences was getting a call and an invitation to, as a straight white man, to come sit and talk about Women's Month. But I sat with it for a little bit longer, and I thought, okay. It would have been equitable to have 3 women on the call, because how often have there been 3 men making decisions about women's bodies, for example? I remember RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, talking about it. Somebody asked her, like, what would it be to have 7 or not to have 9 women on the court? She's like, well, how long has it been 9 men? You know, like, how much history do we need to retroactively acknowledge or to accommodate for or to balance before it becomes actually equitable?
Right.
And so it's a little odd to be a man on the stage talking about women, but I think this is about creating a world that we want to live in, right? And so that's the world I want to live in, where there's equity.
Absolutely. And I'd like to see more equity for healthcare for women. Often we see statistics for especially women of color that don't have the same health care for when they're delivering babies. They are not treated in the same way, and they're I'm lost for words here. The birth rate,
The mortality and
the
infant
mortality rate,
mortality
thank
rate,
you,
yes.
is much higher, which is really unfortunate. Again, in a country that has the best medical tools available to them, why is that occurring? Because of a skin color. That's ridiculous. So I'd like to see healthcare access, and of course, again, that women should have all healthcare options available to them, and to, again, not have, as you say, men making those decisions for them, but their physician and the woman being able to make the decisions themselves.
Right.
So those are some of the things. They should have equal access to education and equal access to jobs, careers. The President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris released a study on equity just a year ago, and I'm fumbling through my notes because I want to find the exact title of it. But their idea is that, you know, once they do this study, that hopefully things will start to improve if they push the study and they push the results, that things need to improve for women in this country.
Yes. Yes. If you've just tuned in, you are watching Encounter, a show of the Broome County Council of Churches, where we engage in fascinating conversations like the ones we're having today. Welcome to the conversation. So yes, this issue of equity ties into kind of the mindset that we were talking about, a mindset that views women basically as inferior and not as capable and having less value that sometimes people may not even realize that they have. And because of that particular mindset, which is a bias and a prejudice really, that impacts and shapes decisions that are made, including access to leadership positions, access to or making to being in political power to shape the laws that impact women a little differently than they impact men.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some ways that we can be better advocates?
Speaking up, getting out there, getting involved, running for office. I'm always promoting my students to do that. But also joining different organizations where you can make a difference in helping build other women up. So if you don't want to run for office, join an organization that helps other women do that. So those are some things that you can do. You can also donate money to campaigns, but you can also do some advocacy work yourself as well. You can lobby at the state level. They are considering some healthcare legislation right now to improve things. So those would be some things that you could do. Of course, voting is number one priority, of course. Yes. Voting for candidates who will represent represent women's concerns.
Yeah.
I would add, especially for people who look like me, I would say listen. Listen to voices that are different from your own demographic. Listen to the voices on the margin, and listen for understanding, not for like how you can form your argument better.
Yes.
You know, listen for the experiences and the ways in which it's different from what you've been through, what I've been through.
Yeah, I was going to kind of pick up on that when you said, oh, it's odd for me, this straight white male, to get this call, from this African American woman, nonetheless, to say, hey, come talk about Women's History Month. But one of the ways I think we can change mindset and advocate for equity is by having these conversations. When we look at all the major civil rights movements or worldwide movements that have advocated for equal treatment and human rights and civil rights, they really have been joined in by both men and women. And they've been often, at least here in the United States, also multiracial. So they have crossed race, class, and gender lines because of this advocacy to treat everybody as if they have worth, and no one's inferior or superior, but people are equal as fellow human beings. Although we are unique as male and female, although we are unique as African American or some Black diaspora person or Latinx, Latino, white even, even though we are different culturally, the humanity in all of us is what we're advocating to be recognized by advocating for equity. So that's why I said, it would be good to kind of have a privileged male as part of this conversation, in part, who's part of a community of unifying around this idea that women are created equal and should be treated as such. Yeah. Because honestly, other men like you would probably listen to you before they would listen to me.
Yeah, all right. You're not wrong. But I think that's one of the odd things that happened when I was growing up. I remember there was a definition of the women's movement that women wanted to erase men. And that's not what equality or equity is about. It's not and it's not even that everybody be treated exactly the same, like that there's this one standardized base. It's that everyone gets treated as human. Right. That all of the differences that we bring are honored.
And that you have access to the same things, regardless of who you are. Right. That shouldn't matter if your name is Kevin or Jamal, or, it doesn't matter, that you should all just have access to education, healthcare, jobs, being treated equally. We talked in our preparation about, as a woman, you take your car to the mechanic and they tell you there are thousands of dollars wrong with your car because they assume you don't know anything about a car because you're a woman. And you're going to fall hook, line, and sinker for it. And I haven't experienced that with my own mechanic. He's very good, but my daughter and my niece have both experienced that. Unfortunately, they were both smart enough to say, I'm going to go somewhere else. Yes. But, we're still being treated that way, that we couldn't possibly know about our cars. We couldn't possibly understand finances. We couldn't possibly understand what we're talking about. Our voices are often silenced. Right. And I was just reading a book about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to bring her up again, and she said that when she was the lone female justice after Sandra Day O'Connor retired, she said that the guys would often, when the 9 justices would get together to discuss their cases on Fridays, they would talk about how to rule on a particular opinion, and she would offer her thoughts, and they would ignore her. And then somebody else would offer the same comment, and they would be like, yep, great idea. Right. So
and this is at like the highest level.
That's right.
Highest level of government in our country.
And one would think, and this is not so long ago, I mean, she just passed away in 2020. So not only did she pave the way for other women to serve on the court, but she directly experienced that as well. And we're still experiencing that.
Yeah. So it's kind of this trying to reach beyond the stereotypes that we've been shaped and formed by and have lived with for the entire history of the country. When we think of how the United States was founded, remember, women were not allowed to vote or even own property for a very long time, and neither were people of color. So that's kind of what we're trying to move beyond and really have a truly equitable country that we're living in. Yeah. So what are some ways that we can celebrate Women's History Month? How can we partay?
One of the things that I do is notice and honor the women in my life, and so to think in terms of this network of connections that are in my life, about who do I support and who has supported me in the community where I live and in the life that I have grown into, and to think about the women in particular, because that's the theme for this month, and to really notice the ways in which I have been uplifted and shaped by the women in my life.
That's a great way. That's a great way. And I don't think we often think about that it's not just kind of giving birth and making the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and that sort of thing, but that the women in your life, moms and aunties and female cousins and godmothers, actually are influencing the person that you're becoming. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, to piggyback on that, I was just going to say, make sure you go thank every woman who's in your life during this month, and really tell them how they've helped you along the journey. And then on a more academic note, SUNY Broome has a gallery in the library, which is public, and you're all welcome. And the gallery display this month is dedicated to Women's History Month, and we have some artwork that the students have done acknowledging some of the suffragists. And we have some other collections in there as well. So if you want to come on up and look at our display, we'd love to have you. And of course, reading books on any famous woman you're interested in is always a great idea. And there's many, many good movies you could pick up and watch as well to celebrate.
Right. And support those female artists if you can, and female-owned businesses, because unfortunately we still have institutional and systemic discrimination, racism and sexism and things of that nature. It is twice as hard for female business owners and artists and writers to be successful and to be properly compensated for what they're doing. So that can be something to do as well. Support those businesses and those artists and those writers and storytellers, those politicians and TV anchors, everyone you know, and just say, hey, is there some way concretely I can support you, whether it's monetary or something else, but also recognition. In our social media time, center them on your Instagram page or something like that, like really support.
Yeah, I think that as important as it is to lift up the story and to have representation and to tell people, look for the role models, it's also important to create those role models, to support them, to make it financially feasible to be that role model. And so it's more than just telling the story and lifting up the story, as important as that is, and that's really kind of been a piece that I keep bringing, but actually give the money there too.
Yeah. Thank you two so much for joining me today and sharing so much important and wonderful information. You've been watching Encounter, a show of Broome County Council of Churches. We hope you've enjoyed it and have learned a lot today. Thank you.